Okay, welcome back, everybody. Okay, Arapatama, Department of Corrections, are we still here? Good morning, Mr. Grace. Can you see and hear us?
Can do, thank you.
And Ms. Miller,
Morning.
good morning.
Morning.
We'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for accommodating us online. My name is Sean Grace. I'm a planner with Boffin-Miskell, and with me I've got Andrea Miller, who's the Manager of Resource Management and Land Management for Arapatama. I guess what I'm going to do is just a quick sort of overview of sort of key points relating to the relief that we've sought in the process, and then I don't intend on taking too long, but we'll open up to questions at the end if that pleases the panel.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. So first point, I guess, just to take it back to the national planning standards. I know there was a question about this in the opening statements, and that was just, I guess, to reiterate that the national planning standards did introduce the corrections special purpose zone through the zone framework standard, and just to highlight that the description of the corrections special purpose zone is as follows. That's areas used predominantly for the efficient operation and development of prisons and associated facilities and activities and the security requirements of prisons. The zone may also be used for new and changing approaches to prisoner reintegration and rehabilitation. I just want to reiterate that, and I've got a couple of points on that as I sort of go through my overview. So Arapatama have been rolling out this corrections special purpose zone, I guess, since the introduction of the national planning standards, and that now applies to, or this zone type now applies to 3 prisons around the country. So that's the Spring Hill prison under the Waikato district plan, the Arohata prison under the Wellington district plan, and the Rolleston prison under the Selwyn district plan. And all prisons around the country, including the Northern Regional Corrections Facility, are subject to designations. But the intent of applying the special purpose zone, I guess, in tandem with the designations, is to provide an appropriate or bespoke or nuanced policy context to the site, as well as enabling a limited subset of non-custodial activities that aren't explicitly enabled by the designation. And that sort of harks back to this changing approaches to prisoner reintegration and rehabilitation, as sort of alluded to in the zone framework standard, the national planning standards. So those additional activities include non-custodial rehabilitation activities, community corrections activities, and supported residential care activities. And I know there were some questions just around what the nature of non-custodial rehabilitation activities are in the opening statements. So that, I guess, the intent of having an activity category for that is to enable people who aren't actually in custody or subject to a custodial sentence anymore, and enable them to undertake, say, a community sentence that might involve a program on site. So I think Mr. Wyeth gave the example of the forestry program. I don't believe that's actually in play anymore, but it's something that may, be reinstigated in the future. But yeah, there's things like gardening, and there can be other programs that occur within buildings on the site. So yeah, but just to make it clear that they're activities for people that are not subject to a custodial sentence, as opposed to those programs that might otherwise be undertaken, in accordance with the designation for those that are in custody on the site. So Arapatama's original submission was simply to enable all activities as per the rural production zone, or proposed rural production zone, as it applied to the site, plus those additional non-custodial activities that I've just touched on. And that was set out in obviously the submission and my original primary statement of evidence. But then as we went through the reverse timetable process, Mr. Wyeth proposed in the 42A report that the zone provisions be simplified, to remove a number of the rural production zone activities that are unlikely to ever be proposed on the site. I mean, he gave an example earlier. Another one was catteries and dog boarding kennels was one of the ones that through Mr. Wyeth's reporting, he said, well, look, there's no point, the likelihood of any such activities being proposed on the site is very low, so why include those on the site? And so that was something that I agreed with. And indeed, overall, we're supportive, well, I'm supportive of the recommended provisions as per Mr. Wyeth's 42A report. But just the one exception to that is, as I've set out in my rebuttal statement, just that we've sought the cascade category in relation to supported residential care activities, and that's to provide a restricted discretionary consent activity category for between 11 and 20 supported residential care units on site. And that's important. I mean, Ms. Miller might be able to talk to the likelihood of this ever, being implemented, but notwithstanding, these units are important. And again, this speaks to sort of the dynamic nature of rehabilitation and reintegration in the correction space in New Zealand. It is a moving, it is a dynamic space, and these units enable Arapatama to manage and monitor people who have been released from custody, but who might otherwise present like a high risk to the community or have high needs. So it's better that in many instances that people in that category who are no longer subject to a custodial sentence are sort of actively managed by corrections on site, as opposed to otherwise being out in the community, as would otherwise be enabled by their community sentence. So I've set that out in my rebuttal statement. I don't intend on going through anything further there, but just to reiterate that I do provide full support for Mr. Wyeth's recommendations on the correction special zone provisions, but just with the inclusion of that amendment to supported residential care, as I've set out in Appendix 1 to my statement. So yeah, that's it, and more than happy to take any questions around that.
Just Sean, around that supported residential care provision, I mean, we've seen a lot of words and heard a lot about it, but at the end of the day, you and Mr. Wyeth agree, is that not the case?
Yeah, that's correct. I noted Mr. Wyeth's support for that cascade activity category, as I noted. So that was nice to hear, and yeah, worked with really appreciated sort of working through this reverse timetable process. Has been excellent in terms of being able to engage perhaps more than what you otherwise would do with the report writer as we went through the process. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think we've, as per Mr. Wyeth's opening statement, I think we've landed in the same place in terms of what we support through the zone provisions. Yeah.
So we don't really need to call it a cascade approach, do we? We just need to, it's just a provision in the plan.
Yeah, well, I guess it's probably planning jargon for enabling a consent category for a certain subset of or a certain limitation. It was otherwise something that required consent anyway. It was just a discretionary activity as opposed to what we've proposed here, which is restricted discretionary.
Okay, and the only other question I've got, I mean, are there any outstanding issues between corrections and the recommendations we've got now from the planning officers?
No, other than that cascading category is the one thing, but yeah, Mr. Wyeth noted his support for it in opening, so I believe that's it.
So the answer, there's no outstanding issues. Is that the answer? No outstanding issues?
Not as I see it, no.
Thanks.
I just have one question. It's around some of these terms and where there should be definitions or not within the plan. Obviously, from a background in corrections, you'd be familiar with these terms, but are they familiar terms that people would understand And why or why not should they be part of the definitions chapter?
Yeah, good question. So the three, as I mentioned earlier, there's the three non-custodial activities that we've sought to enable. So the first is the non-custodial rehabilitation activities, and that one doesn't have a defined term around it. I guess that's deliberately so. I mean, it's quite broad in terms of what's can be enabled, and I noted earlier that Mr. Wyeth supported the fact of not having a defined term around that. So I'm of the same mind there. In terms of community corrections activities, that is a defined term. That's a National Planning Standards definition that the plan has picked up, and we've provided evidence around that in a previous hearing. And likewise, the supported residential care activity, that there is also a defined term in the plan around that, which corrections likewise supports as well.
Thank you. I haven't got any questions for you, so thank you very much. We'll move on now to Ms. Miller.
No, I was just available for questions, so I don't have anything to add to what Sean said. Thank you.
Well, it seems to me that, again, you cooperated and worked with council officers in providing a set of provisions that you both agree on. There isn't anything outstanding, Mr. Wyeth, in your view either?
Nothing outstanding. I'll just cover off that additional rule will be set in my reply.
So, yeah, all I really want to say is thank you for embracing the process and making it work. I think it's been really, really helpful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, and agree with that sentiment. Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, now we move to MLP LLC. Otherwise known as the landing, right? Yeah, please, there's probably room for you all up here, so please come up and make yourself comfortable. Some legal submissions to hand around, Ms. Buxton.
I do have legal submissions. Submissions to hand around.
So it seems to me that you've worked cooperatively here with council to embrace the process.
Absolutely.
And we understand that the big picture issues about, whether it be a precinct or a development area, that's resolved. We accept that it should be a precinct.
Yes.
And we're just really finessing some of those.
Yes, that's where we are. We still have outstanding response papers.
Just like I said, you're standing again, so please feel free to.
Thank you very much.
Not a call.
So we've had a chance to look at that as a team. We're confident that we can resolve all of that. We're absolutely confident we'll come to a solution that's amenable to trial. We might need a few more discussions on that, but our team is 100% confident that those can be resolved. We've had a really collaborative and really positive working experience up to this point, which is how we can come for you with very few outstanding issues. And I think we can continue along there. I know Mr. Lala has had a serious conversations the team's confident in no else.
Yes.
The only outstanding matter, I think, is colour. I don't think it's here to talk about this. But aside from that, there is confidence on reaching the same position.
And in terms of the matters raised in Ms. Someone's memo, which, obviously it's just come to hand.
Yes, we have Mr. Lister here.
Mr. going to address those.
Address those. The Cheshire is here to talk about architecture. Mr. Lala will tidy up any sort of loose planning ends. But the team has answers to all those points raised and also. And so I will start with the submissions. Thank you very much for that. So again, I promise they're brief. We are generals. I'll be followed by Jones, who's going to talk you through a presentation. I have 5 copies of this and we have electronic version which will be up on the screen. And then we're going to go to Mr. Lister, who will answer queries arising from comments. Mr. Cheshire, who will talk you through the architectural development of the site. Actually, the entire team has been involved for a very long time. And so I think that any questions arising, and I can answer absolutely. Mr. Lala is here as well. Thank you very much. What's that? I will get underway. We are here today seeking the landing precinct to be applied to my client's property. This submission is supported by thorough expert evidence and generally supported by and supporting reports. There were no submissions on opposition. MLP LLC owns the landing, 1,000 acre or 400 hectare, because we're from property, which comprises approximately 8.5 along the coastline, a jetty and boat ramp, 6 beaches, an award-winning vineyard, lush restored wetlands, and 7 dwellings, 4 of which are currently available. MLP has invested significant time, effort, and expense in developing the landing, the high-quality, successful venture it is today. The development has been master planned to create an outstanding high-quality residential accommodation, complete with environmental enhancements, biking and walking tracks, and vineyards. And I know that I talked through these environmental enhancements and the protection of often these legal submissions. My understanding is that the commissioners are going to have a site visit later this week.
Yes, we can confirm that we have Wednesday available to us. And so we'd like to come and visit your property. And we're also going to be seeing Matako at the same time, in the same journey. So Wednesday is when we're proposing to do it, where we're just sort of working out the order. And so if there are certain things that you would like us to particularly look at, and if you want to make someone available to us around, that's fine.
If the commission is comfortable, I'd like to see.
Yeah, I would love to have been with up on stage. Movable meetings, unfortunately. So I will arrange for somebody to be there to show you around. I think it's better that somebody, it's a big property. Perhaps talk through some of the work that's gone over. These people won't have the depth of knowledge in terms of this planning application that's been made, but they'll be more than capable.
I think we'll probably be focused on things like, where certain house sites are and things like that. So if they're okay with those sort of, that level of detail, I think.
We'll make sure they're briefed and there'll be a map along with it as well.
And while we're here, with council officers will be interested in certain things you'd like us to look at. And we can come, you can think about this as we progress, and we'll come back to you with your verbal reply on Tuesday.
One suggestion, maybe you might like to go out on a boat and look back from the water.
Someone say boat.
Oh no, maybe qualifier as dinghy. I'm not.
If you
have to row.
No, we try not to make the commissioners work too hard there.
Yeah, that's something we would have an open mind to.
Maybe the council has a view on that, but that's a possibility.
Okay, great.
Paragraph 4, MLP has resource consent for the creation of 45 residential lots under the landing scheme, and for the balance of the land held under a 20 residential parks have been created today. Now, the notified version of the proposed final plan did not practically provide the existing resource consents by including overlays which restricted development, use rights where subdivision is already considered. Accordingly, MLP seeks the landing precinct in order for the proposed plan to recognise and provide while maintaining a balance through ensuring appropriate and consistent design restrictions, landscape and biodiversity benefits, and environmental restoration. Conservation will be maintained with 47% of the property continuing to be set aside for perpetuity for heritage and conservation purposes, and 85% being held in common ownership. And naturally, there's some overlap between these two numbers. Changes sought by MLP are supported by the Section 42A report author, Mr. Wyatt, in principle, subject to outstanding matters identified appropriately addressed. And I know that it's not about support, and I'll appreciate the council's work. Mr. Lala and Mr. Wyatt both had further discussions to lock down any outstanding matters. Over the page of paragraph 9, changes sought in current position. The landing precinct includes objectives, policies, rules, and standards to provide for consented residential development as either a controlled or a restricted discretionary activity, subject to that activity meeting strict and specific architectural and landscape design guidelines. We have experts here today to talk about the plans. The provisions sought are set out in the evidence of Mr. Lala, and these have been updated in his rebuttal evidence to reflect changes and recommendations. Paragraph 11, I'd like to talk the commissioners through the evidence which was presented in support of MLP's position. Mr. Cheshire considers that the 9-metre dwelling height and 60% footprint standards, along with the proposed activity rules and matters of control and discretion, as set out in the precinct landscape design guidelines, are appropriate. He considers these measures will continue to ensure high quality design outcomes while ensuring complementarity to the natural landscape and coastal environment. Mr. Cheshire has provided documentation to illustrate how a house may be located using the 60% rule. A hard copy of this here today. I'm happy to talk you through how this works. Mr. Lister considers the landing precinct provisions reflect the intent and outcomes of existing consents with respect to landscape and natural character matters. He considers the landscape precinct enables consistent development while retaining and restoring open space. He also considered that limiting the property to 45 residential lots with nestled houses and guidelines for building and landscape design will ensure houses are visually recessive. In his reply, Mr. Lister addressed the matters raised in the Section 42A report and provided the landing development area architectural and landscape design guidelines. Ms. Absalom and Mr. Lister disagree on the standard related to colours, and that still stands from Ms. Absalom's comments. In general, Mr. Lister considers the landscape of the landing precinct provisions and architectural and landscape guidelines will achieve appropriate outcomes. Mr. Lala considers the notified zoning and overlays did not provide for development that has been consented at the landing, and instead supports the landing precinct as being appropriate and providing real outcomes, which are consistent with landscape and coastal environment envisaged for the locality. Mr. Lala's assessment of the precinct provisions shows accordance with the proposed district plan's strategic direction and zone outcomes and gives effect to the higher order documents. Mr. Lala states that the landing precinct, in conjunction with consent and design guidelines, will ensure protection and restoration of indigenous ecosystem and will enable economic well-being. In his reply, Mr. Lala addressed the matters raised in the Section 42A report and provided the landing development area plan at a finer scale and in a format compatible with the proposed district plan maps, and an updated version of the landing precinct provisions with further amendments proposed by MLP. I note that Mr. Lala did not support the council's proposed wording changes in the Section 42A from the words acknowledge and respect to protect and enhance. However, he is generally supportive of the Section 42A. It is Mr. Lala's opinion that the changes sought by MLP create the landing precinct, satisfy Section 32 of the Resource Management Act, and are in accordance with the sustainable management principles of Commissioners, I turn briefly to the Section 42A report. There are no major areas of disagreement between MLP's experts and council's experts, and the Section 42A is generally in support. There were no submissions. MLP supports Mr. Wyatt's position of a precinct to achieve planning outcomes. Further, Mr. Wyatt recognises the elements which contribute to the unique nature of the area, including the high quality, low density development, and the, quote, strong focus on conservation with significant environmental enhancements, including wetland restoration, native building and heritage protection. Mr. Wyeth considered that the controlled activity rule for residential units on defined building platforms would address many of the issues raised by NLP, and he agrees that there are benefits in having a target set of provisions for the landowner to provide clarity on the landscape, ecological and development outcomes to be achieved, more specificity on the location of building platforms, specific design guidelines to ensure high quality developments, and to provide services to landowners. Mr. Wyeth concludes that overall, in my view, it is clear that the landing has been subject to a detailed landscape assessment through the subdivision consent process, which has considered the location of each lot. It was also clear when visiting that site that numerous conservation and ecological benefits are being achieved and residential development to date has been carefully designed. In this respect, I support the outcomes being sought at the landing and agree that the proposed district plan should not act as a barrier to consent development that has been subject to a detailed landscape assessment. Mr. Wyeth sets out changes and recommendations to the landing precinct. We note the support for the landing precinct in principle subject to addressed. These changes and recommendations have been answered and provided in the summary, and as noted, there's a willingness from our team and a certainty that we can resolve any outstanding matters here in a practical way as has been achieved to date. As I noted, there was no evidence filed in opposition, and no residents association filed in support of those changes. Commissioners, in summary, MLP has made a significant investment in development of property for high quality to accommodate environmental experience, local economic and employment benefits. MLP wishes to ensure that the proposed plan continues to enable the existing development as well as appropriately providing for future development. The associated conservation and ecological benefits and careful design of residential development are clearly outlined in expert evidence and not contested. The amendments proposed by Mr. Lava in the landing precinct will ensure that these goals, including environmental and conservation goals, are achieved in an appropriate, consistent, and effects-based manner, and one which ultimately gives effect to the sustainable management purpose in the RM. Changes recommended by Mr. Wyeth and clarifications provided by NLP and rebuttal are appropriate, supported by comprehensive expert evidence, and will provide a future development plan for MLP, which will ensure responsible environmental protection and enhancement alongside appropriate development. Thank you.
I just had a question about the A3 plan. I've brought up a page on my iPad, but it's quite small.
Oh, I have A3s of this.
Thank you. That was all. I find it helpful to look at the plan.
Absolutely. Having these in hard copy is very important.
Yeah, so it's quite small.
Everyone else. Yes, no, it's really, it's significant, to see this. And sort of pulled up. Do you have any questions arising from this from me, or is this for the experts?
Not at this stage, I think. Design, evidence and stuff like that.
Right, thank you. And we'll probably have reference to this as we work through.
Excellent. All the experts have copies of this. And talk to it.
Do you have a particular order of witnesses that you?
I would like to invite Mr. Jones to go second. He can provide a presentation on the background to the landing. He's been there since its inception. I think it's safe to say that nobody knows more about it than Mr. Jones. The presentation can be on the screen, but we also have hard copies of this.
At the back here when you're ready to change, and just pause a little because
So Mr. Jones, just a question of clarification for you. Are you the landowner or do you have a title?
I'm the director of the landing. The land itself is owned by, say, PLLC, which is effectively Peter Cooper.
Okay. Right, so I see this is your PowerPoint presentation. It's painful. Well, I'll set that aside and watch the screen.
Thank you, Commissioners. This is I just want to give a little bit of a background perhaps and where we are and why we're seeking out in more general rather than legal terms. The image on screen now is taken from roughly above Whanganui Road, looking towards the southeast and out towards, you can see the distance there, Mobile Island, and it's in the eastern part of the property. You see in the foreground some revegetation work we've done there near the entry road. It's obviously quite obvious. Top left, you can see the wetland rolling down to Rangihu Bay. MLP purchased 238 hectares of the property, typically from the Mountain family in 2000. It was a fairly poorly maintained piece of farm. They were the mountains, a main farm in Westdale Highway. We would often just use this as a to drive the stock out to when things got a bit dry inland, and so it was like classic land rich Cat 4. So there were very few fences. There was no water reticulation. The stock were driven into the wetlands to get water. There was a lot of raw field goats there. So we immediately sort of started a restoration program while we were trying to work out exactly what our long-term plans were going for the property. We fenced off the wetlands, the majority of them straight away, and began planting around that. By the time it took us 2 or 3 years of really just riding that land to try and work out where we best thought house sites could go, really what the best long-term plan was for that land. And we finally got a subdivision consent for 39 house sites in 2000 under the management plan provisions of the we added a couple of pieces of land over the coming years, the biggest bit being around 65 hectares from Medica Station, which was the upper reaches of the Puna Valley, and there's some land over the other side of the road down to Beddy Creek. And we brought that into our scheme. We also bought Motorop Island, which sits just off the coast. So that's our main holding of all that. The Medica land we subdivided into a further 5 lots. So that took us up to 44 house sites. And in our original consent, while it forbade any further subdivision over the property, there was 1 lot on there which was called Lot 42, which we were allowed to subdivide, and we did that. So that got us to our 45 lots that we're sitting at present. The balance of the land, 85% of it, will sit when it's all completed under a lot called Lot 50, which is prohibited from any further subdivision, and that contains all of the wetlands, all of the archaeological sites, the revegetation work we've done within the yard, and some pastoral farming. Those 3 guiding philosophies that I've written here are just made up for this hearing. They're the ones that we have enshrined in our design, in our total belief of how we run the land, respect, and sustain. And so all our appears on the majority of our correspondence that's for our lunchroom's at work. So those are the 3 things that we set our canvas by. It's a long-term intergenerational family ownership. The Cooper family are based in the US, but all 5 children were born in New Zealand, and they all come back with their children, and they all spend time here, deeply embedded into this bit of land. And so while Peter and Sue have been the drivers of this project up until now. The next generation is absolutely committed to continuing this this process that we have begun. One of the key features of the property is its occupation history, both pre-European and early contact through there. There are 48, I think it is, registered archaeological sites on the property now. I reckon I could go and point out another 5 that could be registered quite easily. And we are still uncovering and working with Ngāti Torahina around some other significant finds that have been happening in recent years. We feel the responsibility of that history quite deeply, and we the entire consented scheme was very much based around respecting all of those pieces which are quite obvious on the land when you go and see them. So we're building in and around what we have now been able to show as 700 or 800 years of occupation on that land. We've done a huge amount of work protecting and saving native flora and fauna through weed and pest control, revegetation, riparian protection work and education. We work with Kiwi Coast History Furudura. We have a huge Kiwi population on the land. We have, as part of our previous consent, and this will still endure as we have a ban on cats or dogs. Anybody keeping note, any of our residents there? We plan to create the best of New Zealand, and that's at a lot of levels. That's around this appreciation of history and education I talked about. It's about the quality of architecture we put on it. It's about the quality of New Zealand art that we hold on the property. It's about the wine that we make. It's about the planting we do. We have a real plan to create this as the epitome of the best of New Zealand. And around that environmental, social, governance, sustainability, we set goals every year and report against them and monitor them. In terms of what we've done on the site to date, planted about 1.5 million trees and shrubs. We had our own native plant nursery on site. We grow from seed about 140,000 plants. We probably these days we probably put about 30 or 40 of those, 30 or 40,000 of those into the ground, and we sell the rest to help fund the operation, the nursery operation. But in earlier years, we were putting 300,000 plants a year. So some really significant stuff, and it's pretty satisfying now to be able to wander through that stuff. It's no bigger than these graphics when we put it in the ground, and they are now 30, 40 foot. Pretty good. Of the 45 titles, 25 of them are titles that we are consented to be able to do. We have titled 25 of them, and the locations of all of the unapproved sites sit within that balance lot. We've built 4 houses. We're actually in the middle of designing a 5th right now, as well as building a very state-of-the-art winery building, extensive back-of-house operations, workshops, lunch staff rooms, those kind of things, a helicopter storage shed, and a jetting program. And the vineyard, 14 hectares in the ground now, maybe put a little bit more. 75 tons of grapes, that is probably 9,000 dozen wine a year. So it's a significant operation. We're continuing the revegetation program. We're continuing now with the southwestern end of the property, where we don't have any other development or houses there yet, but we need to just get ahead of the curve and fencing off some of the steeper erosion prone areas and getting planting on that. The history of the application program going well, but it is a continuous thing. We are continually being re-invaded. We work with Attica, Patterson's, Haynes property, all of those. We work collectively, but rats can swim. There's still a lot of feral cats out there. Possums are pretty much gone. It's an ongoing battle, and we're just keeping on pouring stuff into that. We support research and study programs on our property, and those have been archaeological, they've been scientific, they've been stuff around the advantages of having iwis and vineyards. You know, there's somebody out there that will study everything if they get the opportunity. So we are really trying to allow the property to be a study focus for a lot of work that's going on out there. And we have received carbon positive certification through Toitū EnviroCare, which effectively means we're sequestering way more carbon. In the community, we maintain our neighbour, the Rangiora Heritage Park, on a pro bono basis. We share that trust board, but we look after that ultimately cost. On the property, depending on what time of year it is, where it says there between 25 and 45 full-time equivalent staff. A very strong working relationship with Ngāti Mataka, just hung a whenua on the land. And we work closely within the Bay of Islands tourism and wine industries to promote that area. So what are we seeking? So Mr. Lala will discuss the detail of the development, but in short, what we want to be able to enshrine here is that no more than the development rights we have under our existing consents. So we're not looking to add any extra lots. We're not looking to back off from any of the commitments we made in those existing consents. We would just like those to be able to be entrenched with them. We're happy to continue this prohibition of any further residential house sites above the number currently consented. However, we would like to retain the flexibility to be able to move around some sites if we feel that perhaps there is a better place for some of them. So that would be done on a restricted discretionary basis, and we have done that on perhaps 4 or 5 occasions already during the course of these consents. We've received new resource consents from council to be able to do effectively boundary relocations, where we'll take a lot and move it somewhere else. Just a few images really now to put some context to all of the what I've been talking about. That's the wetland that is down in the Western Wairoa. That, as I mentioned, when we got there was full of stock. It was in really poor shape. It's actually looking really good. Large scale linkage work. So there is a plan that you'll see in those plans that have been sent around, which show the revegetation work. Vegetation work, small amounts of it when we arrived. We are, I would say, 80% through that entire project so far. We've done all of the stuff at the eastern end of the property, and I would say that we are 50–60% maybe through the stuff out towards Puronui Point towards the terminal inlet, and we continue with that every year. We manage the landscape holistically, so that means we, as I said, we have a lot of staff out there, and so we're really careful around how we treat every part of the property, and we're really aware on how they affect each other. You just see on the very left-hand side of that photo, in the grasslands there, a few bumps in the terrain. Those are all agricultural drains, and so we keep our vegetation off those, our sites off those. Just sort of just integrate them in without it being particularly obvious. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't understand why we've done some of those things. The winery is a big deal. It's the best and biggest vineyard and winery in Northern by far, and won numerous national awards, and just recently they might get announced quite a significant global award for the wine that's come off that. Investment in the winery, investment in the machinery, investment in the tractors, investment in the serious about the whole thing. It's just another shot of the winery.
But could you just help us and on one of these maps, just indicate where the winery is? On one of these acres. I mean, we see a notation there, Vineyard Villas, so I'm thinking it's close to that.
The vineyard in the whole.
And I'm sort of looking at Google Maps here at the same time.
So you're looking for the winery, or are you looking for
the vineyards? The vineyard.
No, it is further back. If you've got Google Maps out, it's closer to our back of house compound. On the front page, just called the landing precinct.
By the maintenance building.
The winery is filling sort of between lot 43, dotted about in the middle of the site, and then there's our maintenance sheds, and then there's the winery.
So is that publicly accessible?
By appointment, yes.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. There are a couple of public roads there. Obviously, Rangihua Road is a public road. And I think there's public access down to the Marsden Cross, is that correct?
There is a wee road takes you to a car.
Yeah.
And it's a walking track.
Yeah. And is that the extent, and this is just a factual question, it's not loaded.
Yeah.
Is that the extent of publicly accessible parts of your subdivision precinct?
Yeah, the original consent came with the conditions that access to what was called ill-defined, it's probably actually more defined now, the Rangihua historic area, which includes our flatlands down in Te Puna Beach, to be accessible to the public. However, again, not by them just blocking up, but by them giving the call talking to us. The reason for that is we didn't want unfettered access to it, but people who had a genuine interest to that sort of area below where it says 2000 on the summit here. In the historic and heritage nature of that area, would be able to visit it and understand the historic landscape. In terms of people coming simply to go to the beach, we obviously can't stop them coming in by water, but there is no public access across our land to the beach.
Okay. What's the name of the winery? What's that?
The landing.
Sorry, the Landing Winery.
Yep. And in this picture here, that's too tall for me to point out. You can see the winery in that top left square, sorry, top right square. You're going to see the long black building that sits at the bottom of that top right square.
It's quite a confined growing area. It's quite confined.
Yes, we have the area in the top middle green there is recently planted, so we put that in about 2 years ago. If we want to get bigger, there's a little bit right in the very middle screen above the bush where the cow's sitting or whatever it is there right now. But below where the drone is right now, and so on the other side of Rangihua Road, that land that we bought off Marika, if we really want to get serious, then not sure I do really want to get that serious.
Right, thank you. Was that the end of your presentation?
That's the end of my presentation.
Yes, so there's a lot of information, and I was just looking at the assessment criteria as well, relating to ecology, landscape, the built form. You also talked about historic heritage.
Yep.
So archaeology and cultural values. Just looking at some of your sites that aren't surveyed, you said that some of the sites could move around. How will those cultural and archaeological matters be addressed in terms of your site? I'm not sure if that's a legal question or
Maybe planning to take that one.
We've never moved them on to a known archaeological site. We have a cultural management plan. However, it is something that we've spent a huge amount of time putting together and not even trying to hand a hand consultant. She didn't want to sign it at the end. Just popped it in the bottom drawer and said, you know what you're doing, and a bit of a shape. But under we have accidental protocols through any excavation we do. We always notify Hannah to oversee the initial earthworks on site. We have had our archaeologists traverse the entire site and picking ones up right out on that far side. As I said before, there are 2 or 3 that we know are there, with the archaeologists having picked up, but just by what we can read on the land, we know they're there. So we would simply avoid them.
So your response is that because of the previous work that was done as part of the resource consent, you don't feel there should be any new,
I don't.
or maybe your legal or planning.
No, I just jump into the landowner or it needs to be saying, I have no problem with something on there which forbids any development on notified archaeological sites. But I've got no problem with that. I don't know. Nicola?
No, that seems good. I think also the enduring relationship with Ely is very strong. There have been, but on day and language state, the respect is there and underlies a lot of the decision. The landowners have to have those provisions put in, but practically this wouldn't happen.
So just a further question, a supplementary question to that response. It's here in the purple on the last slide. It says registered heritage covenants. So are those the only areas that you're referring to that have the heritage culture? I mean, just there may be additional, information being presented. But so that would, I just wanted to highlight that if there's other sites, will they be mapped in some way, which doesn't necessarily have to give away the content of what those sites are, but to allow for the preservation and protection.
I've mapped every single registered archaeological site on the that we know on the property. Just on Google Earth, just really for our own internal purposes, and they cover the vast majority of the property in different places. Now see if I can.
Well, I think the answer might sit with the planning
Yeah,
framework.
so I think the other point is that in the precinct provisions, it states that all other district-wide objectives, policies, rules and standards plan apply. So I think the archaeological discovery and identification elements that are in the farm district plan will still apply to any development that continues, and these provisions only relate to resident development. So we still need to consider all of those provisions when developing any of those lots.
I'll hear the evidence, and I may have further questions relating to that in the precinct overlay.
I had found that Google Earth. See.
The only thing I'm sort of looking for a building that might sort of utilise the 9-metre building height provision that you've got there, but maybe Mr Cheshire might comment on that, or Mr Lala later. I don't see the need for 9 metres relative to the other special provisions or special zones precincts that we're looking at. So just looking for some just give early notice of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I look at that same sentiment. Okay, so that's, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very informative and helpful. Thank you.
To talk to everybody, I know he has a mind to take there and ask lots of questions that were arisen.
Good morning. Just to summarise the 3 key features of the landscape approach that have been taken on the landing are firstly the open space framework, which is the bush restoration, the wetlands, farming and the vineyards. The second aspect is the selection and identification of the residential lots and the house sites. And the third aspect is the architectural landscape guidelines and the design review process. So that in summary is what the landscape approach is, and that was the same approach that was taken in the 2004 consent. Through this, and as Mr Jones says, the what Mountain Landing is seeking is just making sure that those development rights and the way that it's done is carried through into visions. We've worked with Ms Absalom in updating and refining the provisions that we started with, and I think we've potentially agreed on most matters. So perhaps I've read through Ms Absalom's memo that we got this morning. So maybe the best thing would be just to go through the bullet points that she's.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. They're quite sort of pointed methods that she sets out. So if you're happy with this.
Okay, so the explanation of why no house sites are identified on lots 17 and 25. So those are 2 lots that have been one was subdivided and one was relocated subsequent to the 2004 consent. So the lot 25 was relocated from a more prominent position in the Queen Valley. It's been relocated up into up onto a low ridge, and behind them an existing house known as the Gabriel House.
So, Mr. Just to clarify, so where there's actually an outline of the dwelling, that's a constructed dwelling on the floor.
Yes.
And where there's a dot, that's where house sites have been identified.
Yes.
And where there isn't a dot or a house, that's yet to be opened.
They've not been identified because those lots have been, so 17 and 25,
Yeah.
Those lots have already been created, have already been issued a title. I've got a development right, but there is no house site identified on those sites. So that applies to 17 and 25, as I say, because one was subdivided, one was relocated, and it applies to the Matica, the lots that were brought over from Matica Station. Those are the ones right up the back of the Puna Valley from 10, those are lots 10 to 14.
So the ones that were purchased from Matica Station, is that sort of like 11, 12, 13 and 14?
Yes, 10.
And did they have house sites identified?
Sorry?
But they were approved on the basis that they didn't need a house site. So I think that's, I think what Ms Anson was getting at was, should these have house sites identified as part of it? Is that correct, Ms I mean, maybe we'll bring, someone in, but I think we're all about trying to resolve the issue, so if we just want to clarify exactly what it is you wanted to clarify.
I understood from the evidence provided that the ones that came from the Matakana, a different process would be used to identify for consent for the house. So it would go through a restricted discretionary activity rather than a controlled activity, because no house site had been identified for it. But there was no commentary on lots 17 and 25, and I want confirmation that they are going to be treated in the same way.
Okay, so that's been expressed in the provisions. That those
The
lots are
provisions say, yeah,
a higher threshold of
Control with
consent.
this unidentified house site and restricts discretionary house.
So I wonder if almost Mr. Lala can jump in here with planning confirmation.
Yeah, so the ones that have got the dots on them have controlled activity for the location of the dwelling, subject to compliance with the standards and the plan. The ones without any house site located or a GPS location are restricted discretionary activity, and one of the additional criteria for those is the location.
So I've got,
Location of the building or structure. So I suppose the GPS location or the coordinates of that are covered by the assessment criteria of the restricted discretionary.
take us through that, Rob. I mean, I know we're jumping the gun a bit to your evidence.
It just seems that that goes against the grain of what you're actually saying in terms of the precinct provisions, that you've got a lot defined lot. But the actual house site of it's undefined, and you're going to rely on an RDA process to identify it. Surely in terms of the tenor of the zone and what you're promoting, there'd be an identified house site on every lot.
Well, I suppose that's the reason for having separation between controlled and restricted discretionary, because some of those house sites or some of those lots don't have house sites identified. I guess the other thing to consider as well is that the landing is quite different from Manukau Station, where the sites are all chopped up and the whole site holding is separated into lots, whereas here the actual lot locations have been established where it's not appropriate to have a dwelling, as opposed to, and the rest of it fits into a balanced lot. So the lots are smaller in size and they're scattered around the landform and are being based through that consent process as being appropriate locations for houses. And the rest of the land holding stays as a single land holding to be protected and restored and revegetated. So there is already a level of assessment that's been undertaken as part of the subdivision. And it's only where those half a dozen sites where a location hasn't been defined as yet that the precinct provisions provide a little bit more flexibility, but a more restricted consent status to establish where that house should go.
And even having said that, not wanting to be difficult, the half a dozen sites, 4 of them, the only defining feature appears to be that they have a road frontage. There's nothing leaps out as being particularly environmental in the way they've been chosen, or am I being too cynical?
Yeah.
In all of these sites we're talking about, there's probably only one place a house can go. It might be slightly that way or slightly that way, but the topography of the land, if you take those Matakana sites and if you take site number 17, for example, there is probably only one place you can put a house. On 13 and 14, there are actually existing houses there. They were actually existing farm shepherds' houses from way back. And again, logically, that's the one place on those 2 sites where a house could go. So there is, it's relatively steep to rolling kind of land here, and we're going to pick the easy place to put a house.
How difficult would it be to define building sites on those if that was a task set for you?
It would be difficult, yeah.
So this is essentially your rule 1 in your precinct provision.
Correct.
So basically it says if you've got a house site existing or a dot, you're controlled activity. And then when you don't comply with that standard, you become restricted discretionary. Is that the simple mechanics of it, Mr. Wyeth, is it?
My understanding. That's yeah, under rule one, column one has the house that they're located, and you flip over to restricted discretionary where two aren't met. I mean, I suppose it's a question we could probably think about a little bit further, whether we could drive location.
I was going to say, well, to follow Commissioner Watson's line of thinking, I mean, you must be reasonably advanced in terms of where you think dwellings should go on those lots. Yep. And how hard would it be to identify a building site as part of this process?
My understanding is not hard at all.
And I suppose the incentive for you might be the fact you would all become controlled activity and you wouldn't need discretionary activity. And everything that goes with that.
We have to look at that. Absolutely.
Okay, is that something the council officers would support in principle? You'd rather see all houses, like all building sites identified and controlled?
I think, yeah, it provides more certainty that those areas can be
Yeah. So look, I mean, what we could possibly signal is we're happy to give you some time to do that. Maybe delay the drive to a time after that's provided.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because obviously the existing house site locations would be subject to a landscape assessment. So any further identification of additional house sites would just want to make sure that they've gone through the proper assessment process. And it sounds like that would be easy to do and be reviewed accordingly.
It would need some backwards and forwards, and then we potentially delay your right of line until that within limits, obviously, because we're sprinting to the end here. And then if there's any issues unresolved, you can put that in the right of line or make something like that.
We're very happy to do that. We've had really good communication with council, and I'm happy to set sort of a time frame or a time step towards this. And if the council's happy to delay the rebuttal, that would be really helpful.
Could I, Mr. Chairman, perhaps ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
I would like it confirmed that the house sites we're talking about are 10 to 14, 17 and 25.
And that's it?
That's it, confirmed.
That's my
That
understanding.
then leaves,
Well, that's good. Then we'll record that.
sorry, Mr. Chairman, that then leaves my queries about lots 26 to 45 unanswered. They all have red dots, but they don't have any GPS coordinates.
They do.
They do, down the bottom,
On
one below the table, you see that list down.
My apologies, they do.
Well, that's why we're here.
It's confusing, it's sort of below the table.
It's because it doesn't have all the other information.
Yeah, there's too much.
So weeks of memos.
I have a supplementary question to that. And it does relate to these tables to the left of the plan on the first page. I note that there's a hectare size associated with the existing properties, and that 10, the numbers essentially we're getting further clarification of house sites. Those sites are much larger, than the other existing sites that already have the defined house sites. So that was a further question of mine, because it leaves sort of the door open to how the sites can be moved around a lot more for the bigger site. And then also for the unsurveyed house sites as well. Similar question around how much the house sites can be moved around.
We will have, just in terms of sizes, we will have the sites of all those unsurveyed ones. We'll have those consent applications, so I'll have all of those sizes. Tend to, you sort of exclude 13 and 14 because they have existing houses on them anyway. We can't include them if we choose.
Did you say there are existing houses on
13 and 14. And there's actually an existing house on the lot 37, which you said in between 13 and 14. we don't need that one. So yes, 10, 11 and 12 are basically steep to the bottom.
Okay.
And then as you get up to the OE road at the top, is sort of where you would put a house. Because we can't get a driveway into the bottom of 10, 11 and 12. So we have to access it from the top. And we should not get a driveway down to the bottom from the top. So they're always going to sit up there. If we are to relocate a house in one of those lots somewhere else, we're not looking to relocate a size, 40 years on it. We're really just looking at philosophy for the whole property really is that the landowner had a place to build their house, and generally up there we've got sort of no residential fences. So the idea is you feel like you've got, it doesn't matter where your limit starts and our land stops. And so we would be looking to just bring across something generally on around 5,000 square metres or something like that, which is enough for somebody to build a house, and then they look out on the rest of the balance lot as if it's their own. So there's no incentive for an owner to want to have to mow 11 acres of land where they can get up to do it enough.
I think it'll be quite apparent in site visit as well, where you have this very restricted sites for the truck.
Practicality constraints will absolutely rise.
So it would be better if you included 13 and 14 and just identified where those house sites were. Then I think,
Put a dot in the middle of the existing.
then I think you're totally consistent where you're going with your provisions.
I think what you've shown on lot 24 and lot 16 are actual sort of little house outlines.
Yep.
And so 13 and 14 would have a similar little house outline to show existing. So you'd have two types of notation: outline house built part of existing environment, red dot agreed location, future house site.
Correct. And
What GPS result coordinates.
GPS coordinates, and we'll confirm those landscape assessments. And there was absolutely no chance to review that.
And I will dig out all of these subsequent consents that created all these lots, because there will be landscape assessments done for each of those. See what that answers some of the questions.
Okay, well, that seems really constructive and helpful, and in the spirit of collaboration.
Yeah.
I know we've broken your stride a little bit, but
You know, this is really helpful. We get an answer, we get a.
yeah, so we started with Mr. Lister. So.
Okay, so second bullet point, the numbers on the precinct plans are the 2025 numbers, and as I said in my evidence in the appendix, there's a correlation between the current 2025 numbers and the numbering that was used in 2000. That's the reason that appendix is attached. I think we've already touched on residential development on lots 26 to 45, but just my understanding is that they are a controlled activity because the house sites are identified. The table on the plan says unsurveyed house site. My understanding, I think that's incorrect. I think it should be unsurveyed lots, and these are the lots which have not received their 224 season certificates. So they've been approved by the resource consent of 2004, but they just haven't gone through that process of finding, finding the sites and issuing this.
And can I just confirm while we're here? I don't think so, but I'd like to hear it confirmed. There are no house sites to be identified that are subject to the coastal environment overlay. Have you shown that, I think, in your rebuttal evidence, Mr. Lister?
Of the six lots where the house sites are
Yes, they're not subject to the coastal environment overlay.
17.
I think 17 and 25 are
No,
outside.
they're, sorry, so they are within the coastal environment.
Ah,
17 and 25.
so that's another. option.
17 and
And
25 both are.
That's another reason why you definitely want to see that, right? And the other ones are more inland.
And more inland, yes.
Clicking on overlays and things like that.
So the fourth bullet point is the inclusion of the ecological planting areas. So this I think is a matter that's to be resolved. So I support the 2004 master plan, which identified those natural areas, and I think that the rest of the team support that as well. And that is what has been carried out on site so far, and which is identified in the plan that shows the current features and contours. That's the plan that has been followed, and it's consistent with the master plan. And the question is the mechanism by which it comes into the precinct provisions. I think that's massive.
So there aren't any areas, ecological planting areas to be established. They're all established.
No, they're not. They've all been identified. They haven't all been planted yet. But
It might be helpful if the plan could sort of differentiate between existing and future approved planting areas. Again, I'm thinking about a consents officer down the line.
Yeah.
Processing your controlled activity consent. And if they can sort of go, oh, well, those ecological areas, they're already there. But here are some new ones that are yet to come about, and maybe recent to be thinking of those things.
under the 2004 consent, the ecological areas had to be established for each of the stages of the site before the section 224 certificates could be issued. So that has been carried out. As Mr. Jones says, the ecological restoration is carried on ahead of that process, so that there are areas that are yet to have their certificates issued, where that revegetation is already been carried out, and that can be identified.
Could I make some comments, please?
Mr. Lister, addressing the first, sorry, have you finished addressing those points? I was waiting to see if Mr. Lister finished.
Yes, we've got colour to come, but we'll
Set that aside.
Okay.
The third page of the A3 plans that you've been handed, as I understand it, that's called vegetation in the key. I think is the ecological restoration areas. That's an assumption on my part. It's different language, but I'm assuming it's the same thing.
Yes.
and the wetlands.
Oh, and the wetlands as well. It seems to me that, as you've suggested, Mr. Chairman, a consenting planner with a controlled activity consent application in front of them at some point in the future will find it much easier if the precinct plan actually shows what needs to be done where on one plan, rather than needing to go back to an existing resource consent and find a plan that says this needs to be done and then work out what's been done and what hasn't. There's a lot of information on the precinct plan that actually doesn't need to be on the precinct plan. It could be simplified. I mean, there's all sorts of now out of date property boundaries and so forth. One plan that says everything is much easier than a series of plans that you've got to make reference to. That's really the only point I'm making. If we can have all the information in one place, that would make life easier for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, we have been looking at that, commissioners. The issue is that it's constantly changing, the amount of ecological planting that's done. And to a large extent, the planting's been completed. And what I'm thinking about is you put a rule in, George, we put a rule in here that says, okay, say you've got lot 13, how much landscaping needs to be done just for that lot? Whereas previously we based on a stage basis for that stage. So, I mean, that's something that we're happy to sort of work through in a bit more detail. But it's not, I just say it's not straightforward at this stage.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these precinct type plans, they often are a snapshot. As what's there, what's approved, and it's granted. And it's probably still helpful if you know, at the starting point of the plan being operative, you're showing the houses that are there, the house sites that have been identified. And then planting that's been established and other areas of planting to be established. And I think, you know, there would be recognition that when it comes down to the final detailed planting plan, there might be few changes.
Yeah, so that might be something that we could provide when you're doing your control, you can see,
Yeah,
demonstrate what's been planted.
each sort of consent could potentially update precinct plan. Okay, well, look, I'll leave it with you. I think Ms. Milan's sentiment is supported. So we just want to make it as easy, and I suspect that's the incentive for you, is that you want to make it as easy as you can for a consenting officer.
Yeah,
I'll put
It'd be
it on.
quite nice to see Mr. Lala put himself peril of the planning officer in a local authority.
should be able to do that.
I think at the end of this presentation, I might sum up, I put a list of things that we discussed that we will continue on with the discussion. So I'll continue to take notes, so we can talk about that then.
Right, okay.
And then the last point, which is the one point I think that Ms. Epsom and I disagree on, is the colour question. And that really comes down to whether you have a universal standard that applies across all the coastal areas and outstanding natural landscapes versus the bespoke provisions for the land. And in my view, the latter more effectively achieves the outcome that is being sought, which is to reduce the prominence of buildings and to integrate the houses into the landscape. And by that I mean it's a combination of a standard, which is the reflectance, 30% reflectance value, which in my view is by far the most important parameter, and the guidelines and the control of the activity consenting process against those guidelines. And the guidelines promote the predominant use of natural finishes, so natural timber or stone or natural finish concrete. And I think that's the most important, that will achieve those things more importantly than it was. And then and that can be seen on the side of existing houses. And then where the colours applied to the painted finishes, which are roofs and the framing and the door and so on. I think the provisions, which are the 30% reflectance and the colours derived from the landscape, give a better way of achieving that. Ms. Absalom's given an example of a colour from group D, which she says is appropriate, and I agree with it. And I've given examples of colours from group C, which would satisfy the universal standard, but which I think are appropriate. They include things like treaty pink, jade, and cannon pink. So there's examples there of colours that meet the standards and are inappropriate, and colours that also.
You had to go with what applies to the rest of the coastal development in Bay of Islands or the Far North. Is that going to be a major problem to you and your client?
I think it's a minor thing, but we think that the bespoke provisions more effectively achieve the outcomes that are
Well, I understand where you're coming from, and I think, this is a planning issue that goes on often with a number of things, which is the desire to have a consistent approach where things are similar, like coastal subdivisions in remote areas, or rural areas, and coastal location. And so on one side, you've got council wanting a consistent approach across all of those areas. But then you've got, I think, your argument, which is this site deserves a slightly different approach. But I think what comes with that is an argument that says, because these things apply to this site, which differentiate it from the generality of the sites that you would apply it to. I suppose what I'd be interested in from you and some of the other witnesses is what's going on here at the landing. It would lead us to agree that a different approach is justified.
It's a very valid question, Commissioner. I wonder if Mr. Cheshire has an answer on this from his unparticular experience.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting question. I think that Mr. Jones sort of foregrounded that by saying that the owner's intention right from the beginning has to make the landing the very best that Aotearoa can be. And in that respect, with respect to the building, then that has precipitated a very close examination of each site and each project with respect to the guidelines that were established in 2004 and the very many conversations and research that has been done subsequently focused around the 5 or 6 buildings that have been constructed on the site. And so my argument would be that first of all, the goals and aspirations for the landing are not what you might expect across the great extent of the coastal landing. And that the guidelines and review process that each project is subject to mean that there is a close examination of particularities of each site, that is to say, its topography, coloration.
I think what you're saying is that it's different because there's a commitment for this to be the best that Aotearoa New Zealand can provide. I would think any person who has a subdivision in the coastal environment would probably say that they're trying to achieve the same outcomes. Right next door, your neighbours next door would probably say the same if I put that question to them. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
We're special too.
I feel it's like a cleft stick here since I've done some work.
Do you know if they've accepted the colour palette?
I'm sorry?
They have. So that's all right for Matica.
Right. Well,
what makes you say so?
It's a very different piece of land, very different topography, tenure and ownership.
Can you differentiate it in terms of colour? Can you differentiate it in terms of colour of buildings? Because
I think we can differentiate within the landing site. Yeah, I think, well, that's an interesting point. There are 2 buildings there that let's identify, which I would say not as sympathetic in the relationship with the site as we've achieved at the landing. And I think that comes from the very close examination of each project, each site, and the colours that are appropriate to that. Because what we're doing is it's a very complex landform with the sun moving across it. Sites are seen in different conditions. Early morning light on them, late afternoon light behind them.
Any more complex than any other coastal subdivision in Farnham?
Well, I think they're complex in the sense that the aspirations are so high. And I do think they're unparalleled. The expectation that the landing has. I've been involved in a number of coastal development projects. And I think it's fair to say that the aspirations of the landing without power.
Okay, thank you. I mean, council officers have been listening intently, so I'll leave it there, and you've got something to ponder when you make your verbal reply.
Thank you. One comment I have is that Mr. Cheshire is here to talk about the 60% rule and the location of it and printouts.
And someone's going to provide some response to the 9-metre question as well.
Mr. Cheshire as well.
Well, it's possibly got a bit of crossover to landscape, Mr. Lister, as well, isn't it? Landscape, the height of buildings, the landscape question as well. Would I be fair to say? Yes. We'll let you both answer.
Well, I mean, I've forget. Oh, yeah, fine.
Yes, so in 2004, we looked at provided guidelines each of the sites specifically, and that was tied in with the assessment of effects. That is brought through into the different landscape guidelines, and that includes, excuse me, that includes 21 sites where it's recommended that the buildings to single story. It doesn't say 9 metres, it doesn't say 5 metres, but it refers to that as single story. So that's a bespoke site by site assessment.
In terms of, you talk about the 9 metre. So the rest of the sites are 9 metres, and because that was based on.
But it's based on our experience of building on the land there, that some of the sites are quite steep, and some parts of the buildings that we've done have got very close to 8-9 metres. And that arises really from the intention to develop what we call a landing way of building. That has some common elements in each of the projects, and typically they are the use of natural materials in their natural forms, stone, unpainted concrete, and unpainted timber, with only paint applied to roofing material and joinery elements. And so we are very keen on those elements, that those materials that will naturally weather and therefore sit a bit more comfortably in the land. Part of that has been, part of that landing style has been the use of pitched roofs, and that has both a practical kind of value in the sense of shedding rain, but also have some resonance with barn buildings in the New Zealand landscape. So it's a familiar form rather than a more sculptured form. And so the pitched roofs over some of the buildings that are quite wide, often the gable end, if it's on a falling landscape, gets close to the maximum height. And 8 metres has been a constraint in a couple of cases. And thinking about some of the sites, and one that we've talked about this morning in particular being the old farms pine site. 17. Yeah, 17. Yeah, thank you. It's a very, very steep site, and as Mr. Jones has said, there's probably only one place to paint the house. But it's on probably a 40-degree slope, and it's possible, without having designed it, that some part of that, some gablage might be a falling slope, and therefore I think that the generality of the guidelines preclude anybody building a house which was a substantial small print.
think the other point to note as well is that the operative maximum building height, the coastal environment, from the operative plan is 8 metres. Ready?
I think we've got a more settled on the proposal.
5 metres, Jim.
Yeah, so in the coastal environment and the hearing. Council flying rest at 5. And I think, you know, not trying to take words out of Commissioner Watson's mouth, but I think it's not so much a matter of height, but I think he wants to think about the 2-story building.
Yeah, no, thanks.
I mean, I understand, you know, if you've got a building that's stretching down, it's like, you know, you're wanting to retain certain architectural elements like whatever, that might take you certainly above 5. Obviously, the presumption of 9 metres is a 2-story home. I'm saying that's not the presumption. You want 9 metres, maybe stay at 1. That's
I would presume that it was a 2-story building.
But you want 9, I mean, I'm feeling pretty difficult today. Maybe I should add some breakfast. I just feel at 9 metres, I mean, you're well beyond what it is in any other precincts in terms of Marika Station. You know, they've got a variation in terms of heights, and they've identified a couple of sites from memory where they need 9 metres. And you're supporting that basically with what you've told us just now, that there are some sites that you'd need possibly to go to 8 or 9 metres, but across the generality of the sites, you could do something less.
Good.
And I think, you know, if that's the case, I mean, again, it's difficult, but maybe those sites where you feel you need to go more than a more generic number, whether it be 6 or 7 or whatever, maybe they get identified, and those are the sites that there's a 9 metre height limit. 9 metres right across the whole subdivision is quite an extreme approach.
You could have little asterisks beside the dots that relates to.
And architects love town planners telling them what they should do. I know.
We've got to be more I mean, I think to be fair though, the operative versions allow for 8 metres.
The operative versions are relevant.
Well, not in terms of the consent that was on.
It's
And
a
this is about,
cascade approach.
putting the consent provisions into this plan. And I think the important part to note is the sites that are within the ONL and a few others, where the single level provision applies. So the 9 metres applies to the ones which further back from landform, further back from the coastal edge. So it's, I mean, and I think when talking with the architects and landscape architects on when they're designing those houses, current one that's being designed at the moment, it's around 8 metres, it's further back from the coastal edge. But I think what we're trying to do is have a provision that has a lower scale of dwelling that are in the more sensitive areas, closer to the coastal edge, and further back from that, to allow 9 metres in this sort of. So, I mean, the ones that are single level are still got 20 odd dwellings in that list from Broad S1 to
What's the list you're looking at? The list in?
So in the provisions under.
In the landing.
The landing provisions, page 4, the blue highlight list. Standard S1, which is where the 60% provision is, and the maximum building height.
So, Mr. White, can you remind me, I mean, are these provisions, which one would prevail if a house site was in the coastal environment overlay?
Well, that's one of the fundamental truths of the precinct, is that it would modify the line overlay.
It would or wouldn't?
It would.
It would. So
we are stipulating where it would, yes.
So if we're agreeing 9, it would that would override the 5 metre coastal environment.
That would, but what I think would probably be more useful is where you've got those exceptions for single levels, doing some analysis of where they sit in relation to those overlays. And I haven't done that, but presumably it wouldn't be too hard to do. And then we would actually see how many of these sites are potentially in the coastal environment that would potentially have a 9 metre height.
Yeah, I think that's possibly a way to resolve this. So the thing that's changed from the operative plan, Mr. Lara, just so you're aware, is the proposed that the proposed plan has brought in that coastal rather instead of having a coastal zone, it brought in a coastal overlay and a whole lot of provisions that apply you know, all areas subject to that overlay. And one of the reasonably uncontested rules was that if you're in the coastal overlay, you have a 5 metre height limit. And so we're sort of trying to reconcile where house sites that are yet people might still be subject to that overlay. And whether it being overridden with this precinct is justified. Is that fair summary?
And also bearing in mind the PDP is given effect to the more recent.
Yeah. So this was all at hearing number 4, which was May this year. And that's right. And so we went through why this approach has been taken and its national direction pretty much driving those sorts of.
Yep, so we did an overlay, we put the HNC and CE over the provisions.
Is that in evidence anywhere that we could look at?
No, that was what we did ourselves to determine what the height of it might be, but you know, that might be a helpful bit of information that we can provide with the code requirements.
Yeah.
And I think the difference is probably only a couple of house sites.
Yeah, but it might not be near, that's right. So maybe as part of your homework, you could go back to, and this is all on the website. So if you go back to the right of reply, the hearing report, coastal environment. Yeah, that's correct, Mr. White?
Yes.
Yeah, if you look at that right of reply report, you'll see where the council is heading on that. Certainly, council officers' recommendations. And I didn't hear a lot of evidence opposing it. So that might give you some help. And then, as you say, it might be a very
So on my homework list, so everyone's clear, I have analysis of single story versus 9 metres to show where 9 metres in coastal environment.
But ONL in there as well.
ONC, really?
Agencies.
Agency, sorry.
They're all located outside that list.
I don't think there's any ONFs there, right?
Okay.
I don't think there's.
ONL.
Okay, I'll say about it. Is that clear as mud?
On the homework.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're looking to do is be consistent with our district-wide overlays view. That's correct. There is a really compelling reason why we should take a different direction. We want that quite clearly set out.
Just showing the chair the Madaka station provisions where the house sites are picked out, 1 to 13, 6 metres, 14, something lower, picks out. I'm not saying you necessarily need to do a site-by-site analysis to determine those heights, but maybe pick out those sites where you're really batting for the 9 metres. Because from what you're saying, it's not that much.
Unless there's any more questions for.
60%.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Shushan, could you speak through the
Right.
60% application?
So I'm referring to this document, yes, yeah, and the purpose of this really was to give the designer a little ability to respond to the specifics of the site. So understanding that site markers where they are located were done with a great deal of care and view from afar, but the specifics of the project design and brief may require some movement away from the site marker being at the centre of the building. And so this is a strategy for allowing some movement around the site marker. And the purpose of it is I think, to allow any movement, and the process of achieving that was to identify the longest dimension of the house, and in this case, the house indicated by the heavy black line, and you'll see on the diagonal refers to the overall length of the house being 49 metres. And the 60% argument says that 60% of that dimension might be nudged off to one side or another. And so 60% of that is shown in the lower diagonal as 29.4 meters. And so that might rotate around the site marker, and that red dotted circle indicates the possible extent of the building where the designer wanted to nudge it one way or another for reason of topography, sunshine, view, and so forth.
Okay, no, that's a useful explanation.
I have a question about the diagram, which I thought was helpful. Under the current operative plan, they have a diagram for sunlight rule, for example. Do you think it would be helpful to have the diagram as part of the plan to actually provide that simplicity of understanding for the processing planner?
Yeah.
Happy with that?
Well, while we've got the council officer, is there anything about this explanation that you'd like to clarify?
No, it's been really helpful. I just, when I first saw the standard, I thought it was going to be quite hard for a council planner to reply. There's a simple way of doing it. I mean, just get this, then that demonstrates it, just make sure it's consistent.
It almost justifies being part of the rule, and including the diagram.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay with the red lines on it?
Okay, so I think that's Mr. Cheshire, Mr. Lister. Completed now.
You turned to Mr. Lala, my apologies, the second slightly longer than I anticipated.
So we've got till 1 o'clock.
If we don't have it.
We covered a lot of your matters already.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say that most of my matters are covered. So I just want to touch on a couple of points, clarification, and we've got one point. I suppose the first one was development area versus precinct. And we've covered that. I think the key point that Mr. Wyatt made this morning around the development area would be those provisions would fall away once development was completed. That's probably the point of difference between the precinct and the development area, which probably makes the precinct provisions more appropriate. And I will just sort of harp on about it, but go back to the 9 metre height limit. And I take a point, and I did sort of review the elements from the coastal environment hearing. But I do say that the precinct provisions are generally used, and I think that's from the report, where a different outcome is anticipated from the underlying zone. It's either more permissive or more restrictive. And in this case, I think my view is that it's appropriate to have a more restrictive, more permissive approach. And I think we had a look at the coastal environment. We've double checked that there. It is quite expensive over the landing, and therefore has potential to restrict development from what the consented environment enables. And so in that scenario, and due to the sloping nature of the landform, there's probably, in my view, a rationale behind a higher building height than the coastal environment allows. But we'll go through that analysis and take that a bit further. The other point was around acknowledge and respect in the policy provisions. And as I point out in 2.7 of my reply, I don't see how you can enable residential development and associated residential structures, how they can be expected to protect and enhance natural character and landscape values. And therefore, in my view, acknowledge and respect better terms or more appropriate terms for those policies. Also noting that the objectives and policies from the outstanding natural landscape and coastal environment provisions or sections of the plan will still apply. So those elements of protect and enhance that are in those provisions, as well as the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, will still apply. But these policies relate solely to residential development in the landing precinct. And so in my view, it's more appropriate to have different terminology. Furthermore, the matters of control / discretion and the quite detailed now architectural and landscape guidelines provide a lot more, I suppose, analysis or assessment around future development within those precincts, within the precinct. I think we've talked about the amendments to lot numbering and dwelling locations. I've got more to add on that. In terms of the landscape guidelines and residential building height, we talked about those as well. I would just point out that when we are thinking about, the level of analysis that goes into these dwellings, if I can point you to the landing provisions, and particularly the landscape additions, which are on page 14 of the precinct provisions. Those are the elements that Ms. Absalom and Mr. Lister were talking about in terms of the guidelines for development on those sites. They are quite, and I think this also cuts to the height allowance. There are quite extensive provisions which set out the context and guidelines for development within those sites, which the processing planner will be required to consider, as well as the applicant when it makes an application. And it really does, I think, define instances where development is appropriate above the 5 or 6 metres, given that the analysis that will have to be undertaken for the house sites on those particular locations. Those are quite detailed. I think the last point was question 4 you raised on accidental discovery and protection. I think
Cultural values.
Cultural values. So looking at proposed district plan and the earthworks sections, there are
chapter. And the Tangata chapter as well.
Oh, and that as well, yes. Where there are acknowledgement of where values are established or discovered during construction, and the discovery of suspected sensitive material. So in my view, that there are provisions already planned that address cultural values and accidental discovery of valuable sites without having to provide additional provision from the precinct.
So you've just talked about archaeology. Can you go through the cultural aspects? You only just talked about archaeology.
Yeah. Maybe we can respond to that separately as well. So, yeah.
You may be familiar with that question. I think it was put to another one of your
It
clients
was.
last week.
There is consistency.
Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion, please, Chair?
Sure.
And in responding to that, I'd suggest looking at the Matica Station precincts. They have specific provisions relating to cultural values and archaeological discovery, which I guess sit above the earthworks rules, but just something to consider for consistency.
That's a good steer.
Thank you. And my indication is that the client would be averse to putting in reference in the laws, but if we could reply to that in writing, provide us the ability to have a more considered response, just to signal to the panel where we're going, that seems like a reasonable outcome.
As you done, Mr. Mara?
Yep, that's for me.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's been quite a helpful and iterative session. And we've covered a lot of ground and clarified a lot of things. So because we're in this sort of funny reversed process, we will allow you the opportunity to respond. We'll just need to have a think about the timing of that, but can you give us an indication as to how quickly you think you can respond?
What I'm prepared here is a homework list. Would it help if I talk you through the 6 points that I have? Just to confirm that we have these correct, or would you like me to do this at a later date?
Well, just quickly do it now.
1, provide house site location and landscape assessment to confirm the house sites 17 and 25. 2, provide the site sizes for lots 26 through 45. 3, simplification of planning maps, including existing plans and plans established. The note that we should update this. 4, analysis of single story versus 9 metre to show where 9 metre might be in coastal environment. Show specific sites where heights are sought. 5, include 6% diagram of the rule. 6, wording for cultural matters in the precinct, look at manifestation wording.
Anything being missed? I think that's quite a comprehensive summary.
Excellent. I can circulate that. In terms of a timetable, I haven't had a chance to talk to my
End of
team.
the week.
Sorry.
End of the week. I didn't say this week.
Why don't we reverse that? What's the reply date?
Well, I mean, normally the reply date's 2 weeks after today or tomorrow. But we can be flexible because we are in a slightly. It looks like Mr. Whittle wants to jump in. Is that correct, Mr. Whittle?
Yeah, look, generally, yeah, I think there is a lot of crossover with some of the reporting officers and some oncoming topics that will probably mean it won't be the usual fortnight timeframe. Will probably be in excess of that, I would think. We haven't turned our mind exactly to when that might be. We've got some left over from last week that was indicated a time frame as well that we would probably have and my recollection was decide at the end of this hearing when that might be and actually combine the 2 rights of reply. Mr. Wyeth might recall that conversation. Is that correct, Mr. Wyeth?
It's my understanding that we wrap up the, MB together.
So we're not wanting council under any additional question. We're just thinking about a timeline that the applicant can get back, the submitter can get back to us. And then we'll discuss about when you can do your work.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we would like to get in a position where the agreed provisions with Mr. Wyatt or council prior to council doing its reply. Because that will obviously reduce the number of issues in front of the panel. But the 9 metre one is a bit something that will take a little bit of time for us to do going through.
Well, maybe
the coastal environment.
Maybe you can get back to us in the next day or so, just to what you think your indicative timeline might be. And obviously Mr. Wyeth and Mr. Whittle can be informed by that. And then we can discuss when council responds to that. What I really want to do is get the evidence side finished as soon as we can. And then we'll see where we are with regards to the right of reply.
Well, in that case, I'll look at something tomorrow and it'll set out those six bullet points just so that we have those recorded for everyone, and we'll suggest a time frame where we can reply. And I think from there it might be on council to see where to go from there for the council. So I hesitate to suggest a reply time to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we won't be, I think it would be at a minimum Tuesday next week before we would perhaps even pick up some information. So that would be the minimum starting point.
Okay, well, let's make that today. If you get back to us by Tuesday next week.
Excellent.
And then council will be in a position to respond reasonably quickly, and we'll see where that takes us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jolly good, jolly good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think really helpful session.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're inching closer to.
Yes, that's right. Close to the finish line.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. Consider our case staff. And thanks to council for their collaborative approach here.
Okay, thanks very much.
It's good for the, at this point, that you bring along the requisite people to respond to the questions as well. It really helps your case and it really helps us.
So, you probably need a good half an hour for lunch. You want to let Waitini know?
Yeah, no problems. Okay, stopping the recording.